Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Adventure Engineers. I am joined, as always, tonight with the wonderful Kelsey Dion of the Arcane Library. Kelsey, how are you?
Good. How are you guys? Well, I guess I'm only talking to you, Steven, but...
Yeah, but the chat guys, there's the colloquial guys.
Exactly.
The royal we. Awesome. Yeah, this is going to be exciting. I am super jazzed. Real quick, just a bit of administration. I'm using a whole new sound setup, so chat, y'all let me know if anything looks wonky, because this is literally the first time it's gone live. And, you know, in true Steven fashion, I'm firing from the hip and barely tested it, so...
That's called improvising. I like it.
That's how I live my life. It's good stuff. All right, we are going to talk about some pretty exciting stuff tonight. Why don't you have done so much amazing and ridiculous prep work for this. Why don't you tee up the conversation for tonight?
Oh man, well, we are going to be talking about the Sunless Citadel, which is a mutual favorite adventure. And basically we're going to talk about kind of looking at it from a writer's perspective and then from a DMing perspective. Because, Steven, you have run the 5th edition version of it 3 times, right? 3
times, yep.
That's a lot of times. So
yeah, you
have a lot of insight into how the written things actually play out.
Right.
And then I also did kind of an analysis of it from a writer's standpoint, and we're going to go into that a little bit about, like, what kinds of encounters, like, what the purpose seems to be of the different sections of the dungeon. And I think we're going to mostly talk about just how much we like it, because it's a fantastic adventure.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this is going to kick off a series of these types of conversations. We owe it to our audience to be hypercritical and objective. That being said, we really did kind of start with one where we're both like, oh my God, it's the best. It's like the best one to start. But that's okay. So again, as usual, feel free to sound off, chat. If you guys have any questions, we're happy to jump in and answer them as we go. I'm already seeing the Meepo love. We're definitely going to get there and talk about Meepo. So, all right. I'm going to switch to the notes screen so we can show this off, because I want to start with this cover. And Kelsey, I know you know a lot about the background of this adventure. Why don't you relay that to everybody while we look at that beautiful cover? And why did your camera get screwy fixed?
Oh,
That's on me. That's on me. It's a whole new setup. All right.
We're just practicing, but it's it's the cover on this one. Actually, I think that's what I remember most about it when I first saw the adventure. Because it's so cool. It has the iconic 3rd edition characters who were like the classics. You know, you had your wizard.
Names? They had names at one time.
They did. I remember that the wizard was named Mealy.
Okay.
And I know the dwarf. I think he's on there. The dwarf fighter Tordek.
Oh, that's you're totally right.
Yeah, man. Is he on? He's on there. He's like on the side.
Yeah. I remember this was the first adventure for 3rd, right?
It was like the intro. Like, they didn't really have a starter set. Well, I think they did, but this was sort of the first official, like, fully written out adventure, I believe, for 3rd edition. And it was written in like the year 2000, I think.
Right.
So that's a bit ago. It's like 20 years old almost.
That's awesome. So this was the flagship, the adventure to kick off the new edition. I remember switching from 2nd to 3rd edition and seeing this book, but I never even picked it up. At that time, we didn't even touch published adventures. We ran all our own stuff. But I do remember thinking the cover was really cool. So
it is good. And I think the adventure itself is written by Bruce Cordell, who he's a known name. Like, right now he's kind of known for writing for Numenera, I think, with Monty Cook. But he wrote so many. I think he wrote like the Manual of the Plains and like really cool other adventures. He's like prolific in D&D, so he's a big name. And this is one of his favorites.
I didn't realize that, but that's awesome. And I mean, they clearly brought in some talent to kick this off. Saw a question from Wiley, was this a book or a series? From my understanding, it really is a standalone adventure, but there's a series of books that are colloquially known as the Sunless Citadel Adventure Path that are loosely tied together. I don't think they necessarily are a campaign or tell one cohesive story, but they kind of have hooks into each other. Does that sound about right to you, Kelsey?
Yeah, I do think that's right, and I actually didn't know that until recently, because I know that Bruce Cordell had written a couple other adventures that were sort of marketed in the same way, and they had like that really cool cover art going on, but they are actually all loosely tied together, I've learned. And I think there's maybe like 7 of them. Actually, they go all the way up to 20th level.
Yeah, and I think so as I think I guess you pointed out before we started, you've got your book right there. They've of course redone this for 5th edition in Tales from the Yawning Portal, but I do think the second entry in Tales from the Yawning Portal was that sequel to this. That what is it? The Forge of Fury. Yeah.
It is. Yeah, that's exactly right. I didn't even know that until I actually was looking through the details of the history of this adventure. So
yeah. I have run the Forge of Fury, but like it was a crash course. Like I was reading it as we went and on the fly, and I skipped a bunch of stuff. So I really haven't even given it the justice it deserves. But I don't remember there being strong hooks. I think there's sort of some suggested hooks to just kind of string the adventures together, which is cool.
Yeah,
I'd like to pick up the rest of them and just see how hard it would be to convert to 5e. I imagine not that bad.
No, in fact, I actually unknowingly had sort of... So the 20th level adventure, I just can't remember what it's called in this exact moment. I'll look it up, but I used it as a reference when I was writing a 20th level adventure because there are so few out there that I actually had to go to earlier editions just to find sort of some calibration type, like what can a 20th level party do? Like what are the expectations here? And it was the one that was the capstone adventure to this set that I referenced most closely. Yeah, it's a shame how few high-level adventures there are. I've had to do the same, and they're hard to find. And it's so hard. I mean, this is a bit of a tangent, but it's even hard to estimate like what are players expecting at this level. It's really are they gods flying through the clouds, or do they have to walk on the earth still? Like it's really crazy.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. So just looking at the cover real quick, I love a good evocative cover. I like the rendition of the Gulthias tree here.
Yes.
I'll talk about that because that was really important when we played it, at least one of the games, because it had a big tie-in to one of our other campaigns. We can talk about that when we sort of get to that section of the dungeon. And then, of course, all those little twig blights swarming through the fog. I really like the cover of that. It's
a great cover. I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Cool.
All right. Well, go ahead. Take it away.
Well, no, I think we can jump into maybe discussing the beginnings of this adventure, right? Because every good adventure has like a kickoff section, I think. So this one certainly does. And I guess like one really classic thing, and Stephen, you might have seen this in a lot of first level adventures in particular, is to have sort of a starting town that the players use as their base and hopefully sort of maybe regard fondly as like their hometown once they become adventurers.
Yep.
And this one does not disappoint. It has one.
Yep. The town of Oakhurst. Yeah.
Yes.
It's got kind of the most basic information, but certainly enough to go on and enough for any intrepid DM to build upon, I think.
Exactly. I think the interesting thing about it is it's pretty bare bones. It's not like... It's really like a bullet list of a few people of note. And I was going to ask you, because I'm always curious about this. I myself don't often develop towns. And when I do, I think about maybe doing it in this manner with just like a few people and a few bullet points. And when you were kicking off these adventures, did you actually start them off in the town? Yeah, we started off with them. Well, ours was a little different because it tied into previous campaigns where we had essentially built our own town because these characters were now level 18. So we built this town of Golden Leaf that was really kind of catered to adventurers and sending adventurers out in the world. So we kind of started there, and Oakhurst was the destination. So we spent a little bit of time in Oakhurst, but I didn't really develop it like it might be their home base, because I think their home base was kind of already established in our canon. Right. So then that's another way. I mean, I guess that's good that this town is so flexible, because it's not trying to be anything except what it needs to be. Right. Yeah, it can be if you want it to, or it can be a place they visit and forget about. Exactly. Which is okay too. That is okay. And that's probably the more likely outcome. I'm just looking at it. Just says like, it literally just says, there's a village hall, there's a shrine, and it gives you an NPC tied to each location generally, and that's it. And then rumors. Yeah. Which is, that's enough to go off of, but it's not super fleshed out. But I don't think you need it. And to take a step back, this was an introduction to Dungeons and Dragons and bringing people back
And I read somewhere where someone had said they had sort of decided right when third came out, like, let's get back to dungeons, because it's easy to move away from Dungeons and Dragons. So this opening adventure clearly has enough stuff to get you going and have a world, but it's really about the dungeon, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they make no, like, I don't think they make any attempt at hiding the fact that there is this big dungeon. Like, it's not like the players have to go ask around to find out what to do. Like, everyone's talking about it already. Which is great. I think that personally, I like that as a writer. Yeah. I like having just like here is a big problem that you can confront.
Yeah, that goes back to something I think you and I talk about all the time. But you know, sort of making the clear, this is the thing you need to do, and here's the maybe 2 or 3 calls to adventure, and it's, you know, you guys want to take those up, or should we reschedule D&D?
Exactly. Yeah. Should I go? I prepped this. Okay. No.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hopefully, that's always an interesting tap dance, right, Steven? Because you're like, I don't ever want the players to feel like I'm forcing them down this road, but
yes,
I feel like the majority of the time a cooperative group senses that you're trying to give them a hook, and
that's right.
They don't need to be convinced, but
that's right. And I'm looking at the calls to adventure right now. I don't know, or the adventure hooks. I don't know if you can see my screen, Kelsey, but I'm kind of sharing from D&D Beyond the adventure hooks, and you know, you can see just by virtue of how much effort they put into what they really think the players are going to care about. And I agree with this completely. They sort of have going for glory. You're here to make a name for yourself. And that's like one sentence. And they're like, okay, but there's also this really cool rescue mission. Like, okay, now you're talking my language. But then at the heart of it, there's a mystery to be solved, right? There's people missing. There's these weird trees walking around. There's these strange apples that get sold twice a year that, you know we think they're connected, but we really don't know what's going on there.
Yes.
The mystery here and the setup is awesome. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that exact same thing. That's so funny. I was like, it's the mystery that really, I feel like that's actually the most compelling hook from what is presented.
Right.
Because, and I was actually this sort of played into a bit of the analysis I was doing. There are 3 concrete hooks that get presented for this that you can use. And it really delighted me that each one of them sort of aligns with what I feel are the 3 critical hooks for an adventure.
Right.
You have the going for glory hook, which is all right, make a name for yourself exploring the Sunless Citadel. And that's appealing to the heroic sense of the characters. You're a hero. And then they had rescue mission. So there's a bad thing that happened. There's some adventurers who went missing, and the players find out about this. And that's appealing to their sense of justice, of righting things that are wrong in the world. That's what they're here for.
Right.
Usually.
Yeah. You know, maybe. Every group is different. Maybe you're playing the group of chaotic neutral murder hobos, and that's cool.
Right. And that's why we have 3 hooks. So the final one is the solving a mystery hook. And it's so funny that you said this, because the exact quote is, "You are interested in piercing the mystery of what all this is." And that's appealing to their sense of discovery and wanting to know why this kind of stuff is happening. And I felt like I always really thought that was the strongest hook for this adventure, because that is not just giving the characters something they want, like gold or a title. It's actually appealing to the players at the table.
Right.
You want to know what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like the setup for a cool, folklore story. This could be a podcast about, some weird town in the American Midwest where every year these strange apples show up and the trees are different. People are like, ooh, I want to know what's behind all that. I really need to scratch that itch to know. Now, every single time I've run it, I've thrown everything in the kitchen sink in. I've made it both. You're talking about the rescue mission. You hear about all of the mystery. I throw it all out there, knowing that nobody's going to resist that. If you just lay it all out there, people aren't going to be like, well, sounds pretty weird, we're going to move on.
Yeah.
And I also like having everything, because all of those things get sort of connected and explained later. So I like to have every single thing, every single seed, which then by the end of the adventure has grown into a dark and twisted tree. So
I like what you just said there.
Yeah, you like how I went to the Gulthias tree. Yeah.
You did. and so you've given every hook, which I actually think is great.
Yeah.
Did you find that hard to put in front of the players, or did they just get that by talking to people?
Yeah, so I think every single time I've done it, all 3 times, they well, one time they were actually hired prior to even getting there for the missing people, and then they got there and heard the rest of it. But I think in one, it was just a one shot. It did kind of start in the tavern of Oakhurst, and the mother, whose name I definitely won't remember, kind of burst in. And she was, she had seen adventurers coming into town and was upset that nobody else had been able to do anything about it, and sort of appealed to them in that way. And then as she did, there were some farmers in there, and the farmers were kind of like, well, there's some other stuff going on around here too. They're not the only ones who've gone missing, and kind of filled it all in mostly in the tavern, which is also awesome because that's just classic D&D.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I love starting adventures especially for like new players, or you're starting a big new campaign. It's like starting a story by saying once upon a time,
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. It's the perfect beginning. Yeah, Lady Who Creel. That's right. Thank you, Jake.
Thank you.
So, hey, one thing I wanted to take a step back really quickly, and I wanted to look at this. There's this poem at the beginning, and I have never heard of this author. His name is Arthur Rimbaud, but he has this poem for the Sunless Citadel. It's all things roll here, horrors of midnights, campaigns of a lost year, dungeons disturbed and groves of lights. Echoing on these shores, still clear, dead ecstasies of questing nights, yet how the wind revives us here.
That's beautiful.
That's a good one. I went and I Googled him because I was like, well, maybe there's more meaning to this. And basically the only thing that comes up for him is like, hey, one of his poems is in the Sunless Citadel. So I'd have to do some more research.
Dang, that was his... Well, okay, like props to Bruce for pulling somebody's beautiful poetry out of what was otherwise obscurity, I guess.
I think that's absolutely the case. But all right, so we've talked about the hook. The hook is awesome. Any thoughts on the hook? Is it too much? Because there is a lot there. Any criticisms, thoughts?
So if I were to have a criticism, and I don't really. I just think that the other 2 hooks, the Going for Glory and the Rescue Mission one, they're cool, but I just love the solving a mystery one so much that I guess if anything they seem lackluster in comparison, but they're still perfectly fine hooks. Like they actually work really well.
Yeah, so. The other thing about them is it's a little bit the illusion of choice, because really if you just focus on the mystery of it, part of the mystery is the missing people, and part of the solving of it, I think to Sean's point earlier in the chat, is you're also going to get the glory. So they almost feel like the illusion of choice, like, hey, here's the hook and people are going to bite it more than likely, right?
Yeah, and you can really make it's funny, you can make almost anything appeal to the players, to these sense of things that they want in these hooks. So like it's
right,
it's maybe it's easy for them to feel kind of token in a way, but I like them all. In fact, I think they're all good, and I think the Discovery one, the Solving a Mystery, is the strongest, but also possibly convoluted. Like there's a lot of things going on. The goblins are showing up with fruit. Oh, first there's a white fruit, then there's an apple, and then there's a red apple, and then what about these sprouts that just disappear when we try to plant the seeds? So there's a lot. More than you need, probably.
Yeah, agreed. Maybe could have toned down. I think I've actually left off the sprouts a couple of times, and maybe said other weird things about the trees, but not quite that specific. I had another thought about the intro that I was going to say. Oh, I also don't particularly love that the apple thing is a rarity. Because if you don't set it on one of those days, what are they, the spring or summer and winter?
I think the solstice or
solstices,
might be, yeah.
But if you don't set it on those days, then it's sort of like you don't get to see that coolness at the end. Yeah. And so I kind of wish it was like, hey, every couple of weeks this happens, so that it could feel, because every time I'm like, by the way, every summer solstice this fruit appears, and guess what? It's 3 days until then or something. Like it always feels like a cheap, like, oh, well, that's gonna be a thing, as opposed to like maybe it's a rumor, maybe it's not. Yeah,
and then like that makes total sense too, because at the ending it would be so much more cool if you're like, oh, there's definitely like one of these fruits is like, you don't want it to feel forced, but it would be really cool to be like, yeah, one of these fruits or a couple of them are growing right now. And Yeah, saying like arbitrarily it's 3 days until the solstice. Like you don't even know if the players are going to get to the end of the adventure in time, if they'll miss it. Like
right. So that's maybe my only real complaint. But by and large, I think it's a really cool hook. There's lots of different things to sink your teeth into, and they're easy for player characters to care about. Any other thoughts on the hook and how we get going?
I think there's a lot there for you just to find something that they'll like. So that's at least good. So that's the goal.
Cool. All right. Well, I'll hand it over to you to get moving in your expert analysis here. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is probably worth touching on too, just as a broad thing. But like we always talk about sandbox versus linear and how neither is really the only thing. Like you need sort of a mix of both ideas to really, I think, have an effective adventure. And one thing that I really admire about this adventure is that it tries to embrace kind of the best of both approaches.
Right.
We've talked a little bit about some of the sandbox elements, like the town itself is very able to be placed anywhere. It's very open-ended.
Right.
The hooks are abundant, and like you don't have to force the players on any one reason to go there. And then one thing that we're about to see is that I think the design of the dungeon is really amazingly flexible. Like you don't think like, and the reason being there are faction wars going on inside that you can actually have an impact on. Like they're not just a token like the trolls are in this part and the hobgoblins are in that part. It's like actually a tangible faction war that you can get embroiled in.
Yeah. I mean, just making the dungeon right off the bat feel so lived in is just incredible. And to your point, I also think if you look at the dungeon design, it is like there are a couple of different ways you could tackle it, but I think in practice you kind of go through the same path, which I'm happy with, because the path tells a really compelling story, but really the players should not, or hopefully don't, feel like there's one way to go. It's not a linear dungeon, but I do kind of think there's these interesting gates that sort of still usually occur in the same order, and I think it just works phenomenally well. It's the perfect balance for me of this is a linear horrible dungeon crawl versus there are some decisions to be made here.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the gates kind of thing, that's actually the first thing they encounter when they enter is, do you want to go left or right? There's actually like two options, and they both lead into a section of the dungeon that has a very different purpose for existing.
Right, and it's not the illusion of choice there. I mean, you know, I guess they don't know the difference, but they are two very different experiences if you go left versus if you go right in that first room. Yeah. Which is super cool, but you still kind of wind up in the same spot or very near to the same spot.
Right, and I almost think, and this is actually down to your experience, you might be able to answer this, do the players end up kind of trying to complete or understand both directions before really committing to one? Do you know? Like, how do you feel?
Every single time I've run it, people have just gone left and eventually connect back and be like, oh, that was that right turn that we didn't take. So they do kind of exhaust the whole dungeon and explore everything, but I have yet to see anyone choose right first. I don't know why.
I don't know. Yeah, that's really interesting because you can never count on it, but going left actually is probably the way that the writer intended it to be. Yeah. I think, just based on analysis, like you can never count on somebody just going through the left door, but that's actually the more, you know, when we analyze it, it's rooms 3 through 12. So it's a shorter part. It's actually the shortest part. But it is purely there to create a sense of history for the place. And I didn't realize this at first, but I actually did an encounter by encounter like analysis where we looked at what type of encounter is this? Is it a trap? Is it combat? Is it a puzzle? Is it a riddle? Is it nothing? And then also looked at what is the story purpose of this room or this encounter. And in all cases, for the leftward path, almost all of the story purpose was for demonstrating the history of the building. Like they all were about like the dragon cult and the history and the traditions and the oldness of the building.
Right.
So this was the only Yeah, it's actually really odd because this is the only section of the whole adventure that features that as its main purpose and like the main thing it has on display.
Yeah. Huh. That's really interesting. Yeah, and it makes sense. You're right, because there's all the dragon stuff, and then eventually down at the very back of it, you get that troll that was an elf that converted themselves or whatever.
Yeah, and that's actually the only. So there are 4 possible combats, but there are 5 traps, a riddle, 5 barriers. So like physical locked doors or like visible pits and stuff. So like the focus of that section is not so much combat. It's really like traps and puzzles and history.
That's cool. That's really cool. Because the other way you get into the goblins and that gets pretty combat heavy, right? There are some traps, but it gets pretty combat heavy.
Yeah, so that's the interesting part too. Like that actually, if you turn right, you're going to go into like the main bulk of the adventure, like the central portion. And that one is that one's really interesting. It's definitely the most complex part of the adventure.
Yeah.
And I think its purpose is really to move you from the history into like the main plots and the subplots, and then kind of push you towards the final resolution of the main plot.
Right. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. And even thinking about it as the kind of different pillars, right? That left path is sort of all about exploration, right? Because you're learning history and like putting the pieces together of the place. If you do the right path, you're very quickly into a very social situation, right? With our friend and his cohorts. And then depending on your choices, although my players have always chosen the same way, you then wind up in a combat situation immediately following the social. So you do they kind of hammer home all 3 of the pillars. And I had never really thought about that, how clever that was in the adventure.
It is. And like, there's so many little clever twists, like little very game designy things in here that are actually amazing when you notice them. Like in the very first room, the room where you're deciding whether to go left or right, there's a secret door in that room.
Right.
And I think personally its true purpose is to demonstrate that there are secret doors in this dungeon.
Yep, I think you're right. I've never had anybody find it or even even look for it.
Darn it, because you'd hope like, I mean, I feel like Bruce put it there as a way to hopefully show people that this is a possibility in the dungeon. Right. But then again, like, do people really encounter it? Maybe not. So
yeah, but it pays off almost immediately, right? I'm looking at the map again. Area 9, Area 10, they both have secret doors. Really, 11 kind of does too. So if you take that left path and have found that secret door, which is ultimately inconsequential, it doesn't lead to anything important, but to your point, that is some good game design. That's what you do, right? You train people, hey, I'm going to teach it to you now in a low stress situation. You're going to utilize that same system later for great benefit. That's interesting. Yep.
Yeah, I was like, dang, that was really clever. Like, I'd never thought to do something like that. So
dang.
Good job, Bruce.
I know. I didn't even pick up on the genius of that. Awesome, Jake. That's great. Yeah. Okay, cool. So that's some really good analysis. Wow. I love this dungeon even more right now. I really do. Let's talk a little bit about even going back a step as you descend those stairs into darkness. What a great way to encapsulate and capture the descent. I really, really love those like rickety stairs and like the old fire pits. Like, oh, there were people here. I love the way, in a lot of dungeons, you sort of almost obfuscate the like, okay, and now we're in the first room of the dungeon. But this one is really all about descending into this darkness and this ruined place. Just a great setup again.
Yeah, I forgot we didn't even talk about that. I'm glad you pulled us back because that's one of the coolest, like down into the ravine, and there's like this sense of you understand that there was architecture there. There's like those tipped over pillars and like I just love the idea of going down into this terrible ravine where there's some kind of mystery at the bottom.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. It's starting to get the payoff of the mystery you heard about and just nothing but darkness below you. So great. So D&D.
It is. It's a good one. I still, to this day, am always like, maybe I should write this adventure in a ravine.
Yeah, do it.
I think about it, you know.
I can't name another adventure that starts in a ravine, so you should.
I don't know. Yeah, there's not many. Maybe is the Caves of Chaos a ravine? I don't think it is.
I don't remember.
I don't remember. Oh well, I don't even know. But anyway, it's really like atmospheric. I don't know. It's just so cool. So yeah.
Yeah. I love it. All right, jumping ahead to the very first NPC that you encounter that I would be willing to bet is D&D's most beloved NPC of all time. Room 15, you find the sweet little Meepo. And I have a great picture of Meepo right here. Look at this. Look at his little puppy dog eyes. Oh my god, I love Meepo.
I know.
I love him.
So what has your experience with Meepo been when the players encounter him?
So every single time I amp up his how pitiable he is and how immediately, especially for new players, because I've used this adventure many times for new players, they sort of immediately get, I'm not just going to kill everything here necessarily, right? He is clearly a kobold, which, you know, unfortunately, by virtue of being one of those dragon dogs, I should kill him. But here's this pitiable creature, and man, you would have to be cold-hearted to kill him, right?
You would. And it's not like that possibility is accounted for in the writing of the adventure, but you really hope the players won't do that. I mean, he's so helpless.
Yeah, and just so sweet, but it's a good test, I think, for the player characters to see that not all creature encounters have to end with combat necessarily. And so, again, I think this is by design, training new players, letting them stretch the social muscles in a different situation now. I've never had players not immediately adopt him, though. Players always have loved Meepo. How about you? You said you ran it a long time ago. Do you remember?
I did. I ran the 3rd edition one so long ago, and I mean, it's funny because this adventure always stuck in my mind as one that I really loved. But they didn't want to hurt Meepo. They wanted to help him. Like, even as like a little kid DM, it's possible to convey that he's just this like helpless, sad little guy, you know?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. You gotta have the Meepo voice and the sadness. But I always, every time we've had Meepo in a game, I've always had him show his bravery by the end.
Really?
Right? So he starts off meek and pathetic, and then kind of begs the adventurers to go with them to fight the goblins, because he's trying to save face, and he's emboldened by his new friends. And so by the end, he always shows his heroism, whether he dies horribly or survives the adventure. And I've had both happen.
Oh god, it must have been so sad when he died.
Oh, it was gut-wrenching.
Oh my god. But it's so interesting because, again, like, do you often find an NPC in the first few rooms who like gives you this ethical dilemma? Like, it's not very frequent. So yeah, he's such a good character, and it's really good writing. Like, you don't just plow through all the enemy, and the fact that he's from like the species of enemies, you know, I really like that.
And right off the bat, you can get through the kobold area without any combat whatsoever, right? And that's so cool. You don't have to, but you can. And right off the bat, you're introduced to this living ecosystem, right? Because you find out, cool, in this dungeon, there's a lot more going on. There's these kobolds, but they're talking about how they're having a fight with the goblins. And very soon, you discover the goblins are being influenced by something and someone else. I saw in chat, Spark3737 adopted Meepo. We totally adopted Meepo in our other game. In fact, we ran Blue Alley last Sunday. We actually picked up with the characters that did Sunless Citadel just for fun, and Meepo was there. So Meepo was helping them through this crazy dungeon, and just so good.
Yay! That's so fun. And that comes full circle, because MT Black is one of the few writers who I have seen use an empathetic like goblin creature in one of his adventures, and I was like, hell, he's like kind of like a cool Meepo.
Nice. Oh, I don't know which one. We'll have to talk about that.
Yeah, I think it was Wizard in a Bottle. I don't remember.
Maybe it was. Yeah.
Yeah, but I remember when I read it. That's so funny because he's one of the few writers who's done that, who I was like, this is really well done, you know?
And they're just such fun encounters. As a DM, too, sort of having the ability to have an NPC follow them around is also just mechanically helpful. Because if they get stuck, you know, Meepo's good with traps. Meepo might be like, you know, mention, like, maybe we should check the pressure plates. That's what we would have done. You could just, he can be functional as well as just sweet.
Yeah, he has useful knowledge about the area, but, like, he's also, you know, I mean, I can see him being a character that isn't going to try to, like, pipe up and start leading because he's, like, a meek guy, so. Right.
You don't want him to be a DM PC where, like, I'm just playing by myself and everyone's along for the ride, but he can nudge when needed, and that's exactly how we've used him, and he's just well beloved.
Love him. Oh, man, Meepo.
Yeah, I know. We could have a whole episode about Meepo. Just look at those puppy dog eyes right there. Oh, my God. Look at those eyes. He's so sweet. Okay, so moving on, we talked a little bit about the social encounter that you get with the kobolds, and I think it's Queen Yusdrael, right?
Yeah, that's the hard one, Yusdrael.
Yeah, I think that's right. I really like that encounter too, because that's sort of another dilemma that the player characters have to face, right? Like, whatever they think of Meepo, are they gonna work with these kobolds? Are they going to blast them? So far, all 3 times I've ran it, people have opted to work with them every time.
Wow.
Which is interesting because kobolds are bad guys traditionally, right?
Yeah, typically they are, but I think it's it's possible to get across in this adventure that they're really just here to try to be peaceful worshippers of the evil red dragon god, so
they're just trying to get by. You know, maybe you could offer them a job. I think in the Volo's guide they talk about how kobolds often clean sewers and stuff in big cities. If you just leave them alone, let them clean the sewers and live down there.
They're like fine with it. Poor kobolds. They really are. Like, I've almost never had kobolds be like they're not like goblins to me. Like, goblins are the players are always like, they're definitely bad guys, but kobolds are always kind of like this mix of, like, maybe they're just accidentally here.
Right. Yeah, they're lawful evil, right? So they're working for themselves and certainly aren't looking to make the world a better place, but they also, you know, aren't necessarily going out and raiding villages and stuff. I mean, sometimes, but you know, they seem at least a lot more redeemable than pure goblins or orcs or something.
Yeah, they have the work ethic that goblins do not have. So
right. I love their work ethic. It's their best quality.
Yep, it is. Oh man. And so then typically I would imagine too that typically players like do ally themselves with the kobolds, although they don't have to.
Right.
And if they don't, they're in for some decently tough battles because the kobolds kind of could like converge on them, and Yusdrael is like no slouch. Like, she actually is pretty dangerous.
And I will say in 5e, I think kobolds are slightly underrated in their challenge rating because of that pack tactics.
Yes.
That pack tactics is nasty. Having run the beginning of Horde of the Dragon Queen, which we will definitely be talking about in a later episode, hordes of kobolds can level a party quick. Yeah,
dang. Like, because the having advantage when you're attacking essentially equates to a +5 bonus. So that's like a huge jump in the number of, you know, times you're getting stabbed or bludgeoned with whatever. What do they have? Do they have daggers? What do they have?
I think they maybe have short swords.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Oh my gosh. So that's like a huge jump. That takes you from like, I mean, that takes you to like definite hit each time. So
yeah, I mean, you know, the way the math kind of works out, it's roughly equivalent to a +5. So yeah, you know, if they're already, I think, a +3 or something to hit. Okay, they have daggers. They're a +4 to hit, so it sort of makes them a +9. I mean, that's gonna hit level 1 PCs and wreck them.
That's like higher than some 3rd level characters are hitting at. So like, they're definitely gonna swarm you, and it's gonna hurt. So look out.
Yeah, they're nasty little guys. But all right, so moving on through the dungeon here, bringing the map back up. This is sort of Yusdrael's chamber. I like the room 23 has that sort of path that leads off into the Underdark, right? Am I remembering that right?
It does, yeah, I think so. Is that room 23? Yeah.
I think so, which is just kind of neat. It's kind of a nice hook that maybe your players are like, you know what, when we're done, let's come back and head down there. And now you've got a whole other kind of adventure ready to go.
Yeah, there's like 1 or 2 spots in here that imply a much greater world, and that's neat. So
right, yeah. And I like room 20, sort of the non-combatant kobolds. I think every time I've run it, my players have wound up taking a rest there. Maybe a short rest, and I think in some cases even a long rest, because the previous combats are a little tough, even for level 1 players. That's always fun to describe their kind of culture. Sorry, go ahead.
No, exactly. It's another kind of ethical thing too. Like, there are combatant kobolds in there, but like, you're not gonna like walk into a room of like commoner non-combatant kobolds, regardless of whether you're their enemy or not. I feel like it's kind of like a funny story. Like, when I was a kid playing D&D, I had an excellent DM, and we all walked into a room of goblin non-combatants and went murder hobo on them. And he's like, okay, you're all evil now. You have to make new characters. Like, it was like really like an ethical dilemma that we learned a lesson about. So
nice. Yeah. And you're faced with that again as we get to the goblins. So kind of moving past the kobolds, clearly the next sort of section of the dungeon deals with goblins, and every time I've played this, at least, it's pretty combat heavy. Usually the sounds coming from the main hall there, whatever that is, 40, tends to attract an attack.
And this section is much more full of traps, barriers, and then like possible stringed combats. So it gets intense in this area. Right.
And usually for us, by then the party is leveled 2. Every time I've run this, through the kobold area gets you done with level 1. That's usually 2 sessions if there's a lot of role playing in the town. And so moving into session 3, they're usually level 2, so they're a little bit more powerful. They got some new stuff to test out, and the combats are they're both grueling and pretty epic.
So many goblins.
So many goblins, and also one of my favorite fights in room 30, kind of moving around down there, that big giant like nasty rat.
Oh, yes. Yeah, like the mother rat, right? Like, ooh.
I believe we all referred to it as Mama.
Ooh.
Yeah, makes it real gross.
Yeah, but it's cool, too, because it explains there's like a couple little sub-stories, one of them being why are there giant rats all over the place? Right. Which that story is. And then the dragon is another sort of sub-story that comes into play in this section of the dungeon. Right,
and the dragon is so cool. And first of all, how cool is it that the first adventure for 3rd edition, and in a lot of cases, most people's first experience with even 5th edition, at least for me, we've run this a lot, you have now delivered on both Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
Right?
That's actually really true.
You're not bullshitting your players. You promised Dungeons and Dragons, and they've now got it.
Yes. Right? Oh, that's so funny. That didn't even specifically occur to me. You're completely right. This is a super classic situation right here. So. Right.
And that's a fun fight too. That little white dragon wormling. I think in 2 of my 3 games, it decimated Meepo with its breath attack.
Oh my god! And it turns on Meepo, which is a sad situation. Meepo's like, "I'm so glad to have you back," and the dragon's like, "Nah, I like it here better." So. Yeah,
that's awesome. What a cool encounter. All right, well, it looks like we're actually coming near on time. Why don't we finish up this upper part of the Sunless Citadel, and I think next time we'll pick up with the lower level and kind of final thoughts. I think that's a good way to go. You agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, cool. All right. This has been fun. I hope you guys in chat are enjoying this. Please feel free to jump in anytime. I think this is sort of the original vision we had for Adventure Engineers in many ways, and I think we're going to continue to do this with a lot of published stuff. And surely the campaigns will take a lot more analysis, but I think this is really fun to kind of break these things down. I've learned stuff. I didn't even think about how the layout of the dungeon was so perfect on the 3 pillars. Wonderful.
Yeah, me too. I didn't know that. And I mean, you and I, we've both played in or run this adventure, and we think about these things a lot, and I never noticed these elements with this until I really broke it down and was like, holy crap, right. These are sections specifically designed to meet a design goal.
Yeah. Yeah, which is good because it's done in such a way that's so obfuscated. You don't feel like it's obvious, and now you're getting to the exploration part. It's just I didn't even realize it until now. The genius of this dungeon.
Yeah, I know. It's cool.
All right, so oh, go ahead.
No, what room were we on? I don't remember.
Well, I was jumping all around because I wanted to talk about that big nasty mama rat, but also rooms 29 and 26. Both of those were really fun little puzzles. Now, we've talked about puzzles, and sometimes they can kind of be hit or miss, but I've really dug them. There's just a lot of cool stuff to figure out there and a lot of things for people to try. And as I'm thinking about this now through a different lens of newer players coming into D&D, this, I think, really starts to teach people that you don't have a prescribed list of things you can do. Try anything. Do anything you want, right? Like, yes. It's not a board game. There's not a list of actions you can do to things, especially out of combat. What are you going to try?
Yes. I like that. I like players describing what they're attempting instead of just being like, well, I roll investigation to figure out what to do, you know?
Right.
Right. And these are set up so that you do have to really explain what you're doing, and you can't just like solve it by rolling. And I like it. I think that these are fun, and they have like a really thematic element to them, like the dragon cult that was here. It's a really good way to kind of give a little reminder that that's what this place is for. Yeah. I appreciate these. I thought they were actually very clever.
Yeah, they were a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. All right, let's jump all the way back over towards the sort of final section of the upper level, section 40. And, you know, section 40 is sort of like a mirror darkly for when you approach the kobolds. At least it has been in my experience, because this is when you fight. You fight the goblin tribe, and there are the non-combatants who sort of flee in terror from you. Right? Yeah. There's like the women and children flee to 36, and you're fighting the combatants, and you know that's sort of a what could have happened previously. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because I like it that it's set up that you're always gonna get this like turn of the coin where like you're either being conditioned about how the game works, or you see something in one light and then you see it in another light, you know, a few rooms later. And this is a prime example. I'm really curious, did your players ever like attack the non-combatant goblins?
So mostly no. But in one of them, we had a ranger, and his favorite enemy was Goblinoid. And he sort of out of character was like, guys, I know this is like a little brutal and a little grotesque, but I think he is going to be storming off towards the non-combatants. What if you guys want to stop me? You know, and so I think they kind of tried to talk him down, but he was geared up to go in there and slaughter them. You know, it's his background where they were his favorite enemy, and he hated goblins like with every fiber of his being.
Oh, yeah. That is so interesting, because that's one of the few times I'd think that a non-evil character would have a good reason to do something like that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting. But the players were like, no.
Yeah, and he talked about it out of character first. It wasn't this like everyone was taken by surprise. He sort of gave everyone the opportunity. Like, are you guys going to stop him? Because I think, you know, and I think I've told you the way we handle inter-character conflicts is we basically say, first, if you both agree on the outcome, then that's what it is. If you want to punch a character and you are okay with that character punching your character, then it happens. Or you can both agree to roll, as long as you both agree to roll it. But if either character is like, you know what, I don't want to go there, then it doesn't happen. Like, it can't happen. So that was one of those situations, was like, how are you guys do you guys want to stop him, or should he, you know? And so, yeah, exactly what Spark 37 said there. Handle it as authors. Like, it was, you know, it was the right way to approach it. Added a lot of interesting weight to the situation, because it was sort of grim, and, you know, I don't know. It was a really interesting scene the way it played out.
Cool. Yeah, that is very interesting. I don't remember what happened in this room when I was running it, so I always was curious, you know, how would people react to these enemies but not really enemies. So it's interesting. It's cool that it's in here. It makes you think.
Yeah, it's another fun dilemma, really. All right, so the final room of the upper level, room 41, with the hobgoblins or bugbears, I can't remember now.
These guys are hobgoblins. Yeah.
The handful of hobgoblins, and the first glimpse of anything really tree related, right? Because there's the blight in there, and then the vines, I think, kind of coming up the well. So it's sort of like many hours later, perhaps many hours of gameplay later, it kind of ties back into that initial hook of like, ooh, weren't they saying some weird stuff about trees? Because look at this. This is weird.
Yes, and very clever. It's like a really smooth way to transition into what will later be the Grove level.
Right. Yeah, I love it. Good fight. I've never had them come out. I've had instead they hear the fight and are like, you know what, let the goblins deal with it. If they can't, well, then we'll deal with it. But, you know, they're not going to risk themselves for it.
Yeah,
they're not noble leaders.
No, they fight from the rear. So
yeah,
I was curious too about this one because there is a goblin shaman named Grunel.
Yeah.
And she does not like the hobgoblin overlords. So I always wondered if that would come into play. It's a possibility, but I feel like at this point, the players aren't really asking questions. They're like, yes, the goblins are our enemies. We're here to fight them.
I wish I could honestly remember how that's come out for me. I might have to go back and rewatch the one that we have recorded of it, because I feel like I love having enemies surrender because I think it's more realistic. But, you know, if she were taken out early, it wouldn't have had the opportunity. I don't remember what happened there, but that is a cool possibility of her being able to surrender and be like, whoa, hold on. You kill these guys, we're done, we're good.
Yeah. And again, like, and to commend the writer, you know, it'd be easy for the writer to be like, well, at this point, they're not going to want to, you know, parlay with the goblins. They're here to defeat them. So I think it's, again, like good disciplined design to be like, there's always the chance that the players will want to talk their way out of a situation and then offer that as an option.
Right.
Or a possibility, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a cool way, too, where they could learn more about what's happened. If she survives, they can talk about what's been going on. Clearly, they're now in trouble by the kobold, so they're going to have to bounce. But there's some cool possibilities there for exposition as well. So,
yes.
All right, well, we're nearing the end of the episode. I think this is a great natural stopping point. We finished the first floor, so why don't next episode we pick back up with the second floor, the bottom and the grove and everything. And to come back to what was said a little earlier in chat, yeah, I think it would be cool to look at some indie adventures. Unfortunately, my favorite indie adventures would be really weird to explore in depth on screen because I would be putting Kelsey on the spot because she is by far my favorite author. But I do have a lot of other ones and have run a lot of other ones, so that would be a lot of fun to do. I do think we want to do some of the published adventures because I think we have some thoughts that are kind of interesting around them. I know a lot of people do them, but you know, I think we can still have a good time talking about those. Staggering Giant on factions. Sure. Do you mean the kind of published factions, or do you mean, you know, homebrew factions, or what are you thinking?
Because we can do. I love talking about the interplay of, like, in a dungeon when there are factions and camps of power. And it's hard to write that kind of thing. So I think that'd be, and it's also hard to run because you're kind of keeping two separate mega NPCs in mind, I guess. And so, like, that's an interesting thing to talk about and look at.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. Hey, that's a good topic idea, Staggering Giant. Maybe we talk about making a living dungeon, right? I think rolling that up, you know, what are the things to keep in mind to make a living dungeon? Because I think that's vital to making dungeons interesting, right?
Yes.
A dungeon that's just stocked full of random stuff is about as boring as you can be, right?
Yeah, and it shuts down the opportunity for things like in-depth role-playing and having a living dungeon, making the creatures in there real that you can interact with and influence is like that's holding up an entire pillar of the game that otherwise wouldn't be there, which is the social aspect.
Right. Agreed. Cool. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up the episode? Chat, thank you guys for hanging out. Feel free to announce any closing thoughts or final questions. Kelsey, what do you think?
I'm glad we got to talk through this. There's a lot to say, but this is an adventure that if you're looking for clever design and thoughtful design, this is a great one to really analyze and think about, why did Bruce write this and why did he choose to put this here, and why are there 3 combats in a row here and then 2 rooms where there's very little. You know, there are reasons why he did that. So it's a good one. Yeah, it's so good. I mean, as a DM, there's so much so many eye-opening things that you taught me about this even just tonight that makes me love it even more. It's sort of like I knew what I liked, but I couldn't maybe put my finger on why, but it's just great. It's wonderful. It's one of the best published adventures I think of all time. Yes, I love it. I'm gonna run it for a group soon. I'm sure. I'm like gotta run this. It's too good to leave in the closet. Like it's a tale from the yawning portal worth telling.
Yeah, it'd be interesting now to look at the next one, to look at the Forge of Fury and compare them, because I've never run it. I don't know the Forge. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree. We should analyze it kind of in a similar way and see like,
yeah,
what's going on with it. You know.
Yeah, it'd be neat to see if the momentum was kept, or I don't. Who wrote the Forge? Was it also Bruce?
I think so. Let me check.
Yeah,
it might well have been. I know he did contribute several of the adventures to this series, so
right. Because it'd be interesting to see if he takes a different tack for the sophomore adventure. Right, this is your introduction. Let's see what what happens here.
There's a hint at this adventure buried in the Sunless Citadel. But actually, this was written by Rich Baker, who was another one of the core writers of 3rd edition D&D. So
gotcha.
It was Richard Baker.
Cool. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, next time we will wrap up the Sunless Citadel, and then we'll figure out what we're going to talk about after that.
Yes. Cool.
All right. Well, thank you all in chat for joining us. Kelsey, thank you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. I was glad to be able to talk about this one finally, and I'm so glad folks in the chat were along for the ride. So.
All right. Well, cool. All right, guys. I'm going to launch a raid right quick. So go ahead and get on board for that. Let me see if that's actually launching. Oh, it's weird. I've got this new interface. Yes, got it. Cool. So, guys, thanks again for joining us. You can check us out tomorrow night. We're getting back to Waterdeep Dragon Heist finally. Tuesday night, we're back with Chronicles of Peril, and lots more D&D to come after that. So, see y'all later.